I came back from Florida after 3 weeks of heart surgery. When I opened the door, I saw my daughter-in-law selling my furniture in the yard. She said, "We thought you wouldn't come back. Sign the papers for the house." I smiled and called my lawyer. Launch Plan B. An hour later, the sheriff arrived. I'm glad. I had always believed that family was the one thing you could count on when everything else fell apart. That belief carried me through 30 years of marriage, through building my construction company from nothing, through burying my wife Eleanor 3 years ago. It was the belief that kept me going when the doctors at Tampa General told me I needed emergency triple bypass surgery. My name is David Carter. I was 48 years old, and I had spent my entire adult life building something I thought would outlast me. A home, a business, a legacy for my son Ryan. The house on Maple Street in Columbus, Ohio wasn't just property. Eleanor and I had raised Ryan there. We'd celebrated every Christmas, every birthday, every small victory in those rooms. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to change anything. Her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. Her garden still bloomed every spring because I'd learned to tend it myself. Ryan had married Megan 2 years before Eleanor died. I remembered the wedding. Small, tasteful, at a vineyard outside the city. Megan was charming then, attentive and warm. She laughed. The first warning sign came so quietly I almost missed it. It was 6 months before my surgery, during a Sunday dinner at my house. Megan had been asking about my will, my life insurance, the deed to the house. She framed it as concern. "We just want to make sure everything is in order, Dad. You're not getting any younger." I was 47 then. Not young, but not ancient either. I brushed it off as millennial anxiety about the future. Ryan said nothing, just moved his fork around his plate. The questions kept coming. How much was the house worth? Had I thought about adding Ryan to the deed? What would happen to my company if something happened to me? Each question felt like a small needle, barely noticeable on its own, but together they formed a pattern I didn't want to see. When my cardiologist told me I needed surgery, I called Ryan first. The line was silent for a long moment before Megan's voice came through. She must have been listening on speaker. "We'll take care of everything while you're gone, Dad. Don't worry about a thing." She offered to drive me to the airport, to handle my mail, to check on the house. I gave her a spare key. I gave her access to my home because she was family, because I trusted her. The surgery went well. 3 weeks in Florida, recovering in a rented apartment near the hospital, walking a little farther each day, feeling my strength return. I called Ryan every few days, but he rarely answered. When he did, the conversations were short, distracted. "Everything's fine, Dad. Megan's handling it." Handling what? I didn't ask. I should have asked. I flew home on a Tuesday morning in late March. The cab dropped me at the end of my driveway because there were cars parked along the street. Cars I didn't recognize. People were milling around my front yard, carrying furniture. My furniture. Megan stood in the middle of it all, a cash box in her hands, directing strangers like she owned the place. My leather recliner, the one Eleanor had bought me for our 20th anniversary, was being loaded into someone's pickup truck. My tools, my books, Eleanor's china. I walked, then she smiled. That same warm smile from the wedding, and said words that still echo in my head. "David, we didn't expect you back so soon. We thought—" She stopped, recalibrated. "We thought you weren't coming back. The house was just sitting here. We're getting it ready to sell." Ready to sell. My house. My home. "Where's Ryan?" I asked. "Inside, packing." She stepped closer, lowered her voice. "Look, I know this is a shock, but you need to think about what's best for everyone. You're not well. You can't manage this place alone. Sign the papers, and we'll make sure you're taken care of." She held out a folder. I didn't take it. I pulled out my phone and dialed my attorney, Frank Morrison. He answered on the second ring. "Frank," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's David. I'm home. Start Plan B." There was a pause. "You sure?" "I'm sure." Megan's smile faltered. "What's Plan B?" I didn't answer. Within the hour, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway. The deputy's name was Martinez. He was young, professional, and clearly uncomfortable with what he found at my address. I showed him my ID, my deed, the spare key Megan had used to enter. He took notes while Megan protested, her voice rising with each sentence. "This is a misunderstanding," she kept saying. "He gave us permission. He's confused. He just had major surgery. He doesn't know what he's saying." Martinez looked at me. I looked back at him, steady and calm. "I know exactly what I'm saying. I did not authorize this sale. I did not give permission to sell my belongings. I want it stopped." He nodded and turned to the crowd. "All right, folks. Sale's over. If you've purchased anything, you'll need to return it and get your money back from these two." He gestured at Megan and Ryan, who had emerged from the house looking pale and shaken. People grumbled, but they complied. One by one, my possessions came back. Most of them, anyway. Eleanor's china was chipped. The recliner had a tear in the leather. My toolbox was missing entirely. I stood on my own lawn and watched strangers carry pieces of my life back through my front door like some grotesque reversal of the morning. When the yard was finally empty, when the last car had pulled away, I walked inside. The house was gutted. Not structurally. The walls were still standing, the roof was still sound, but everything that made it mine was gone, or displaced. Closets emptied, drawers rifled through. Eleanor's jewelry box was missing from the bedroom. My file cabinet, where I kept important documents, had been broken into. Papers were scattered across the floor. Ryan stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, looking everywhere but at me. Megan was beside him, whispering something I couldn't hear. "I want you both out of my house," I said. "Now." "Dad," Ryan started. "Now." They left. I locked the door behind them, and I stood in the silence of my ransacked home, trying to understand how I had gotten here. How had my own son stood by while his wife sold my belongings? How had I missed the signs that were so obvious in hindsight? I spent the rest of that day taking inventory. The damage was significant. Jewelry? Gone. Approximately $8,000 worth of Eleanor's rings, necklaces, earrings, pieces I had planned to keep for Ryan's future children, if he ever had any. Tools? Missing or damaged? Another $3,000 at least. Furniture sold at yard sale prices for a fraction of its value. But the worst discovery came when I checked my file cabinet. The deed to my house was missing, and in its place was a document I had never seen before, a power of attorney, granting Ryan and Megan full control over my finances and property, supposedly signed by me 2 weeks earlier. The signature was a decent forgery. Not perfect, but close enough to fool someone who wasn't looking carefully. I had not signed it. I had been recovering from surgery in Florida, barely able to walk to the mailbox, and someone had forged my name to steal my house. I sat down heavily on the one remaining kitchen chair and felt the fear settle into my chest. Not the fear of surgery, not the fear of death, the fear of betrayal, of being utterly alone against people who should have loved me. But fear, I learned long ago, is just information. It tells you what matters. And what mattered now was that I was not going to lose everything I had built to a forged signature and a charming smile. I called Frank Morrison back that evening. "I need a full forensic audit of that power of attorney," I told him. "Handwriting analysis, notarization records, everything. I also need you to file for an emergency protective order on the house and its contents. And Frank, I want to know if there's any way they've accessed my bank accounts." There was a long pause on the line. "David, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go down this road? This is your son we're talking about." I thought about Ryan standing in my kitchen, unable to meet my eyes. I thought about Eleanor and what she would say if she could see what he had become. "I'm sure," I said. "They made their choice. Now I'm making mine." Frank agreed to start immediately. I spent the night on the floor of my living room. The couch had been sold. with a blanket from the linen closet that Megan had apparently deemed worthless. I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow looked like someone coming back to finish what they'd started. In the morning, I began to plan. First, I changed all the locks. I hired a locksmith I had known for years, a guy named Ted who had done work for my company, and had him install deadbolts on every door. I also had him add a chain lock to the front door and reinforced strike plates on the frames. "Expecting trouble?" Ted asked. I just nodded. Second, I installed cameras. Small, discreet, motion-activated. One on the front porch, one on the back door, one in the driveway. I wanted a record of anyone who came near my property. Third, I went to the bank. I sat down with a manager I had known for 15 years and explained what had happened. She pulled up my accounts, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Someone had withdrawn $12,000 from my savings account 2 days after my surgery, using the forged power of attorney. The teller had followed procedure. The document had looked legitimate. "Can you reverse it?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not without a court order. If the POA is ruled invalid, you can pursue recovery. But right now, legally, it's a valid transaction. $12,000? Gone?" Added to the jewelry and the furniture and the tools, I was looking at nearly $25,000 in losses. And that didn't count the emotional cost, the knowledge that my son had stood by while his wife robbed me blind. I drove home and sat in my empty living room and thought about what I had left. I still had my company, small but profitable. I still had my reputation in this town. I still had friends, colleagues, people who knew me and trusted me. And I still had leverage. Because here's the thing about forging a power of attorney. It's a felony. Notary fraud, identity theft, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. These are serious crimes. If I could prove the document was fake, Ryan and Megan wouldn't just lose their shot at my house. They would face criminal charges, prison time, permanent records that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Was I willing to do that to my own son? I didn't know yet. But I was willing to build the case. I was willing to gather every piece of evidence, to document every lie, to prepare for the possibility that this would end in a courtroom. Plan B was no longer just a precaution, it was a weapon, and I intended to use it. Frank Morrison called me 3 days later with the preliminary results. The handwriting analysis was inconclusive, the forger had been careful, but the notarization records were damning. The notary listed on the power of attorney was a woman named Patricia Vance, licensed in Ohio. Frank's paralegal had tracked her down. "Here's the thing," Frank said. "Patricia Vance says she never notarized that document. She says she's never met you, never met Ryan or Megan. Her seal was used without her authorization. Someone stole her seal or copied it. Either way, that's notary fraud. It's a separate felony, and it cracks their whole case wide open. If the notarization is fake, the document is invalid on its face. They can't use it." I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. Not much, but enough to keep going. "What's the next step?" "We file a civil suit to void the POA and recover your assets. At the same time, I'll refer the criminal evidence to the county prosecutor. They'll investigate, and if they find enough, they'll press charges." "How long will it take?" "Civil case. Maybe 3 to 6 months to get a ruling. Criminal investigation could be faster or slower depending on their caseload. But David, once we file, Ryan and Megan are going to know you're serious. They're going to push back. I expected that. I was counting on it, in a way. I wanted them to know. I wanted them to understand that the quiet, recovering father they had tried to exploit was not going to disappear quietly. Frank filed the suit on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, I got a text from Ryan. "Dad, we need to talk. This has gone too far. Megan and I just wanted to help. Can we meet?" I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me, the part that remembered teaching Ryan to ride a bike, that remembered his face when his mother died, wanted to say yes, wanted to believe there was some explanation, some misunderstanding that could be resolved over coffee and conversation. But another part of me remembered the forged signature. The missing jewelry. The $12,000 withdrawn from my account while I was lying in a hospital bed. I texted back, "Talk to my attorney." The response came fast. "You're making a mistake. You don't want this to go public." Was that a threat? It felt like one. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Frank. The following Monday, I got a visit. Not from Ryan, from Megan alone. She pulled into my driveway in her white SUV and walked up to the front door, like she still had every right to be there. I watched her on the camera feed, then opened the door before she could knock. "David," she said. Her voice was softer now, conciliatory. "Can we talk? Just the two of us?" I stepped onto the porch, but didn't invite her in. "Say what you came to say," she sighed, looked down at her hands. "This lawsuit, it's going to destroy Ryan. You know that, right? He's your son. He made a mistake, but he's not a criminal. He loves you. He was scared when you went into surgery. He didn't know if you were coming back. And he panicked. He forged my signature. I forged it." She met my eyes then, and there was something hard behind her contrition. "Ryan didn't know. He thought you had signed it before you left. I told him you wanted us to handle things. It was my idea, my mistake. If you want to punish someone, punish me, but don't destroy your son's life over this." It was clever. I had to give her that. She was offering herself as the scapegoat, trying to split me from Ryan, to make me feel guilty about prosecuting my own child. And maybe it was even partially true. Maybe Ryan hadn't known. But he had stood in my kitchen, unable to look at me, while strangers carried away my wife's china. He had let it happen. "You stole from me," I said. "Both of you. You forged documents to take my house and my money while I was fighting for my life. If Ryan didn't know, he should have. And he definitely knows now. What has he done to make it right?" She didn't answer. Her face went still, and I saw the mask slip, just for a moment. Underneath the soft voice and the pleading eyes, there was calculation. There was anger. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly. "We were trying to help you. You're alone, you're sick, and you're going to spend whatever time you have left fighting your own family in court. Is that really what you want?" I leaned closer. "What I want is my house, my money, and an apology. What I'm going to get is justice. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff again." She left. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. My heart was pounding again. Not dangerous, but not comfortable either. The doctors had told me to avoid stress. This was not that, but I wasn't going to back down. The evidence was mounting. The fake notarization, the unauthorized withdrawals, the forged POA. Frank's paralegal had also pulled cell phone records showing that Megan had been in contact with a document forging service in the weeks before my surgery. It was circumstantial, but it was damning. The point of no return had arrived. I had crossed it willingly, and I wasn't looking back. Frank Morrison filed the expanded suit on a Wednesday, adding counts of fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation. He also forwarded the evidence packet to the county prosecutor's office. Within a week, I received notice that a criminal investigation had been opened against both Ryan and Megan Carter. I was sitting on a new couch, a simple thing I'd bought to replace the one they'd sold, when I got the call. Ryan's voice on the other end was raw, shaking. "Dad, what have you done? There are detectives asking about us. Megan's terrified. This is going to ruin our lives." "You should have thought about that before you stole from me." "I didn't steal anything. I thought—" He stopped. I could hear Megan in the background, her voice sharp and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. "Dad, please, drop the charges. We'll pay you back. We'll give you whatever you want. Just make this stop." "It's not up to me anymore," I said. "The prosecutor decides whether to press charges, and the civil case is about more than money. It's about what you did, both of you. I closed my eyes. I lost my son when he stood in my kitchen and let his wife sell my life out of my own front yard. I lost him when he didn't call me once to ask how I was healing. I lost him when he chose her over everything I taught him about honesty and decency. This isn't about furniture, Ryan. It's about who you've become. The line went dead. I expected retaliation. I got it faster than I anticipated. 2 days later, a man showed up at my front door. He was tall, well-dressed, with a briefcase and a business card that identified him as an attorney. But not Frank's kind. His name was Carlton Webb, and he specialized in elder law and guardianship cases. "Mr. Carter," he said smoothly, "I'm here on behalf of your son and daughter-in-law. They're concerned about your mental state. They believe the stress of your recent surgery may have affected your judgment, and they're considering filing a petition for guardianship." I stared at him. "Guardianship, for your own protection. You've been making erratic decisions, suing your own family, accusing them of crimes, isolating yourself from people who care about you. These are signs of cognitive decline. A court-appointed guardian could help manage your affairs and ensure your well-being." I felt a cold fury settle into my chest. They weren't just trying to steal my house anymore. They were trying to steal my autonomy, my mind, my right to make my own decisions. "Get off my property," I said. He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Think it over, Mr. Carter. A guardianship battle can be very public, very expensive, and once the court starts questioning your competency, everything you say and do becomes evidence. Is that what you want?" "What I want is for you to leave before I call the police." He left, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. I called Frank immediately. He was furious. "They're trying to flip the script," he said. "Classic abuser tactic. They accuse you of being the unstable one, and suddenly you're defending yourself instead of prosecuting them. We need to get ahead of this." "How?" "Psychiatric evaluation. Independent. Court-certified. We get a doctor to confirm that you're competent and of sound mind. That takes guardianship off the table." I agreed. The evaluation was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I gathered every piece of evidence I had. My medical records from Florida, signed by my surgeon confirming a successful recovery, my bank records showing responsible management of my accounts, my company's financials demonstrating that I was still running my business effectively. I was going to bury their guardianship petition under a mountain of proof, but the waiting was hard. Every night, I lay awake wondering what they would try next. Every time my phone rang, I braced for another attack. The evaluation came and went. The psychiatrist, a calm, methodical woman named Dr. Reeves, spent 3 hours with me. She asked about my memory, my reasoning, my emotional state. She asked about my relationships, my goals, my understanding of the legal situation. At the end, she nodded slowly. "Mr. Carter, you're under significant stress, which is understandable given the circumstances, but there's no indication of cognitive impairment. Your judgment is sound. I'll submit my report to the court." I thanked her and drove home. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. That night, I sat on my porch and looked out at the street where I'd raised my son. The trees were budding, the air smelled like spring, and somewhere in this city, Ryan and Megan were plotting their next move. But for now, I had won a battle. I had defended my mind, my competence, my right to fight back. I decided to take a few days off. Not from vigilance. I kept the cameras running, kept my phone charged, kept Frank on speed dial. But I gave myself permission to rest, to cook a real meal, to watch a baseball game, to remember that I was still alive, still healing, still capable of joy. The war wasn't over, but I was still standing. They came with gifts. It was a Saturday morning, a week after the psychiatric evaluation, and I was drinking coffee on the porch when Megan's white SUV pulled up. This time, Ryan was with her. He stepped out of the passenger side carrying a box, a bakery box, pink and white, tied with a ribbon. They walked up the driveway together, shoulder to shoulder, their faces carefully arranged into expressions of remorse. "Dad," Ryan said, "can we talk? Please. We brought your favorite lemon pound cake from that place Mom used to go to." I looked at the box. Eleanor had loved that bakery. She used to bring home their lemon pound cake every Sunday after church. Ryan knew that. He was using it deliberately. Put it on the step and say what you came to say, I told him. Megan stepped forward. David, we've had time to think. We made terrible mistakes. We were scared. We were stupid. And we hurt you. We're so sorry. Her eyes glistened. Were those real tears? I couldn't tell any more. We're dropping the guardianship petition. We just want to make peace. And the lawsuit? I asked. Ryan glanced at Megan, then back at me. We were praying that you'd consider dropping it. We'll pay back everything. We'll sign whatever you want. We'll move away if that's what it takes. Just please, Dad, don't send us to prison. I looked at my son. He was pale, thinner than I remembered. There were shadows under his eyes. Part of me hurt for him. The part that would never stop being his father, no matter what he'd done. But I remembered something Frank had told me early in the case. He said, David, people like this don't stop. They test boundaries. If you give them an inch, they'll take everything. The only language they understand is consequences. You forged my signature, I said. You stole my money. You tried to have me declared incompetent. And now you're standing on my porch with a box of cake, asking me to make it all go away. We're asking for a second chance, Megan said. Her voice had an edge now, just barely. Isn't that what family does? Forgive? Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't try to lock you away when you fight back. I stood up. You can drop the guardianship petition. That's your choice. But the lawsuit goes forward, and the criminal case is out of my hands. If the prosecutor decides to charge you, that's between you and the state of Ohio. Ryan's face crumpled. Dad! Take your cake and go. We're done here. They left. The bakery box sat on the step for hours before I finally threw it in the trash. I didn't trust anything they touched. That night, I called Frank and told him what had happened. He wasn't surprised. They're scared, he said. The evidence is solid. The prosecutor is moving forward. They're looking at real charges, felony forgery, theft, fraud. Megan's looking at 2 to 5 years if convicted. Ryan, maybe less if he cooperates, but his record will be permanent. Good, I said, but the word felt hollow. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't a lawyer, someone who knew me, who understood what this was costing me. I called my brother Tom. He lived in Indiana, about 3 hours away, and we talked maybe once a month. He knew about Eleanor, knew about my surgery, but I hadn't told him about Ryan and Megan. I hadn't wanted to say the words out loud. Now I told him everything. There was a long silence when I finished. Then Tom said, Jesus, David, I'm so sorry, I don't even know what to say. Your own kid. Yeah. You want me to come out there? I can take a few days off? I thought about it. I wasn't used to asking for help. I'd been handling things alone for so long. Since Eleanor died, really. But the isolation was wearing on me. The house felt too big, too empty. The silence was too loud. Yeah, I said. I'd like that. Tom arrived 2 days later with a suitcase and a case of beer. He walked through the house, saw the empty shelves and the ransacked closets, and shook his head slowly. They really did a number on you. They tried. We sat on the back patio that evening, watching the sun go down, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. Not happiness, not yet, but a kind of settling. I wasn't alone. I had my brother, my attorney, my neighbors who had started checking in after they heard what happened. I had a community, however small. The war wasn't over, but I wasn't fighting it by myself. They came back one more time. It was a Tuesday evening, just after Tom had left to drive back to Indiana. I was washing dishes when the doorbell rang. I checked the camera, Megan and Ryan again. But this time, they weren't carrying gifts. They looked angry. I opened the door. I told you we're done. You're ruining our lives, Megan said. Her voice was flat, controlled, but I could see the fury underneath. The prosecutor is talking about indictments. Ryan could go to prison. For what? Some furniture? Some cash? For forgery? For theft? For trying to steal my home and my freedom? We were trying to help you." Her voice rose. "You were alone, you were sick, and you weren't thinking clearly. We stepped in because someone had to. And this is how you thank us?" I felt my temper flare, but I kept it in check. "You stepped in to take what wasn't yours. You forged my signature, you stole my money, and when I fought back, you tried to have me locked away. That's not help. That's exploitation." Ryan pushed past her. "Dad, listen to me, please. Drop the charges. We'll pay everything back, twice over. I'll take out a loan, I'll sell the car, whatever it takes. Just don't do this. Don't send me to prison. I'm your son." "Then act like it." His face twisted. "You never loved me. You loved Mom, you loved your business, but you never had time for me. And now you want to destroy me over some money? Who's the real criminal here?" The words hit harder than I expected. Was there truth in them? Had I been too focused on work, too absent when he was growing up? Maybe. Eleanor had handled most of the parenting while I was building the company, but that didn't excuse what he had done. It didn't make forgery and theft and fraud acceptable. "I loved you," I said quietly. "I still love you, but love doesn't mean letting you get away with this. It means holding you accountable." Megan grabbed Ryan's arm. "This is pointless. He's made up his mind. He'd rather see us in prison than admit he's wrong." She looked at me, and her mask finally dropped. "You're going to die alone, David. A bitter old man in an empty house with no one to take care of you. Is that what Eleanor would have wanted?" I stepped closer to her. "Don't you ever speak my wife's name again." She flinched. Just slightly, but enough to satisfy me. I stepped back and pointed at the street. "Get out. Don't come back. If you do, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." They left. I closed the door and locked it, then stood in the hallway, breathing hard. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. The doctors would not be pleased. But under the fear and the anger, I felt something else. Resolution. They had shown me who they really were. The soft words, the tears, the bakery box, all of it was performance. Underneath, they were still the people who had tried to steal my life. And they would do it again if I let them. I wasn't going to let them. That night, I sat down at my computer and wrote out everything I wanted to say in court. Not for the lawyers, for me. I wrote about Eleanor, about the house we built together, about the son I raised and the man he had become. I wrote about betrayal and justice and what it means to stand up for yourself when the people who should protect you are the ones attacking. I didn't know if I would ever say those words aloud, but writing them down made them real. It made me real. The trial was coming. I was ready. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled, fluorescent lit, with an American flag drooping in the corner. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Frank Morrison, a stack of documents in front of us, and watched Ryan and Megan enter from the side door. They were dressed conservatively, their faces arranged in expressions of solemn regret. Their attorney, Carlton Webb, guided them to the defense table with a hand on each of their backs. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Emery. She had a reputation for being fair, thorough, and utterly intolerant of games. I took that as a good sign. The case was a civil suit. The criminal charges would come later, in a separate proceeding, but the stakes were just as high. If we won, the forged power of attorney would be voided, and I would be entitled to full restitution of everything they had taken. If we lost, they would have legal cover for what they did, and the criminal case would be much harder to prosecute. Frank went first. He laid out the facts methodically. The forged signature, the fake notarization, the unauthorized bank withdrawals, the yard sale conducted without my knowledge or consent. He called the handwriting expert, who testified that while the signature was a skilled forgery, there were telltale inconsistencies. The slant was wrong, the pressure was uneven. He called Patricia Vance, the notary, who confirmed under oath that she had never met Ryan or Megan, never notarized any document for me, and that her seal had been used without her permission. Then he called me. I walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Frank's questions were straightforward. Describe your relationship with your son. Describe the events leading up to your surgery. Describe what you found when you returned home. I answered calmly, clearly, keeping my voice steady even when I talked about Eleanor's jewelry and the forged signature. Carlton Webb's cross-examination was more aggressive. Mr. Carter, isn't it true that you were under significant medical stress at the time of these events? I was recovering from surgery, yes. And isn't it possible that you signed the power of attorney before you left for Florida and simply forgot due to the stress? No, I did not sign that document. I have never given anyone power of attorney over my affairs. But you gave your daughter-in-law a key to your home. You asked her to handle your mail. You trusted her with access to your property. I trusted her because she was family. I did not authorize her to forge my name or sell my belongings. He kept pushing, trying to plant doubt, trying to make me seem confused or forgetful. But I held my ground. I had prepared for this. I knew my own mind. When Megan took the stand, she was a different person. Soft-spoken, tearful, sympathetic. She talked about how worried she had been when I went into surgery, how she and Ryan had only been trying to protect my interests, how the power of attorney was meant to help, not harm. It was a mistake, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. A terrible mistake. We never meant to hurt David. We love him. He's family. Frank rose for cross-examination. Mrs. Carter, you testified that you signed the power of attorney with Mr. Carter's consent. Is that correct? Yes. And you testified that the notarization was legitimate? Yes. Frank held up a document. This is an affidavit from Patricia Vance, the notary whose seal appears on the power of attorney. She states under penalty of perjury that she never met you, never notarized this document, and that her seal was used without her authorization. Is she lying? Megan hesitated. I don't know. Maybe there was a mistake. A mistake? Her seal was forged, Mrs. Carter. That's not a mistake. That's a crime. Carlton Webb objected. Judge Emery overruled him. Frank pressed on. Mrs. Carter, did you purchase a notary seal stamp from an online vendor 3 weeks before Mr. Carter's surgery? Megan went pale. I don't remember. Frank held up another document. This is a receipt from notarysupplydirect.com, dated February 12th, for one official notary seal stamp. The shipping address is your home address. Would you like to revise your answer? The courtroom was silent. Megan looked at Carlton Webb. He looked at the table. There was nothing he could do. The evidence was overwhelming. Judge Emery leaned forward. Mrs. Carter, I'm going to give you one opportunity to answer truthfully. Did you forge that power of attorney? Megan's face crumpled. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then quietly. Yes, I forged it. The courtroom erupted. Carlton Webb stood up, sat down, stood up again. Ryan put his head in his hands. Judge Emery banged her gavel and called for order. I sat at the plaintiff's table, watching it all unfold, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, but exhaustion. It was over. They had lost, and I had won. But the victory felt hollow, because the person I had beaten was my own son. Judge Emery ruled from the bench. The power of attorney was voided. Ryan and Megan were ordered to pay full restitution, jewelry, furniture, the $12,000 from my account, plus legal fees. She also referred the case to the prosecutor for criminal charges. This court does not take elder exploitation lightly, she said. What you did to this man, your own father, was calculated, cruel, and criminal. You will face the consequences. I stood up. Frank shook my hand, and I walked out of the courtroom into the bright afternoon sun, alone. The criminal trial came 4 months later. It was faster than Frank had predicted. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Dana Riley, had prioritized the case as an example of elder financial abuse. She wanted to send a message. Megan was charged with forgery, fraud, theft, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Ryan was charged as an accessory. They both faced years in prison. I testified again. This time, it was harder. The criminal court was larger, more formal, and the stakes were higher. I looked at Ryan across the courtroom and saw the boy I had raised. The boy who used to sit on my shoulders at baseball games, who cried when his goldfish died, who hugged me so tight when Eleanor was diagnosed with cancer. That boy was still in there somewhere, but he was buried under years of poor choices and worse influences. The defense tried the same tactics: stress, confusion, misunderstanding, but the evidence was too strong. The forged seal, the bank withdrawals, Megan's confession in civil court. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Megan was sentenced to 3 years in state prison. Ryan, because he had cooperated with the prosecution and because his involvement was less direct, received 2 years probation and 500 hours of community service. He was also required to undergo counseling and make full restitution. I watched the sentencing from the gallery. Megan cried when the judge read the verdict. Ryan sat perfectly still, staring at nothing. When it was over, he turned around and looked at me. Just for a moment. I don't know what he was hoping to see. Forgiveness, maybe. Or regret. He didn't find it. I just looked back at him, steady and calm, and then I walked out. The restitution came in slowly, over the next several months. The $12,000 from my bank account, payment for the furniture they'd sold at the yard sale. They had to sell their own car to cover it. Eleanor's jewelry was gone forever, but they paid the appraised value. Every check that arrived in the mail was a small victory, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like settling an account that should never have been opened. I used part of the money to fix up the house. New paint, new furniture, a proper security system. I hired a gardener to help me with Eleanor's roses. My knees weren't what they used to be. And I repaired the damage they had done to the file cabinet and the closets. Slowly, the house started to feel like mine again. But the best part was smaller, quieter. It was the morning I woke up and realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The cameras were still running, the locks were still solid, but I wasn't checking them every hour. I wasn't flinching at every car that drove past. I was just living in my house, drinking my coffee, reading my paper, like a normal person. They had tried to take that from me. They had tried to make me small and scared and dependent. They had failed. I was still here, still standing, still free. A year passed. I sold the construction company. Not because I had to. It was still profitable, still well run. But because I was ready. I was 50 years old, and I had spent my whole adult life building something. Now I wanted to enjoy it. I found a buyer who promised to keep my guys employed, shook hands on the deal, and walked away with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I traveled. Not far. I wasn't ready for international flights or crowded airports, but enough to remind myself that the world was bigger than my house on Maple Street. I drove to Maine and watched the sunrise over the ocean. I flew to Arizona and hiked in Sedona. I visited Tom in Indiana and spent a week fishing with him at his cabin on the lake. I started dating. It surprised me more than anyone. I met a woman named Catherine at a fundraiser for the local hospital. She was a nurse, a widow like me, with 2 grown kids and a laugh that reminded me of Eleanor's. We took it slow. Coffee dates, walks in the park, dinners at quiet restaurants. I told her about Ryan and Megan eventually. She didn't judge. She just listened. And then she said, "You did what you had to do. That's not cruelty, that's survival." I think she's right. Ryan came to see me once, about 8 months after the sentencing. He was thinner, quieter, with a job at a warehouse and an apartment on the east side of town. Megan was still in prison. They were getting divorced. Her idea, apparently, once she realized he couldn't help her anymore. He stood on my porch and asked if I would ever forgive him. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe someday, but not yet. You hurt me, Ryan. You stood by while your wife tried to steal everything I had. You let her use my wife's name to manipulate me. That's going to take a long time to heal." He nodded. His eyes were wet. I'm sorry, Dad. I know it doesn't mean much, but I am. Then prove he left, because here's what I learned through all of this. You can't control what other people do. You can only control how you respond. Ryan chose betrayal. I chose justice. And justice won. My life now is quiet, comfortable, full of small pleasures. I have my house, my health, my brother, my friends. I have Catherine, who makes me laugh and challenges me and reminds me that the future can still be bright. I have mornings on the porch with coffee, afternoons in the garden, evenings with a good book and a glass of wine. I miss Eleanor every day, but I don't miss the fear. I don't miss the suspicion. I don't miss the weight of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. As for Megan, she was released after 18 months for good behavior. Last I heard, she was living with her mother in Kentucky, working as a waitress, trying to rebuild. The felony conviction follows her everywhere. Job applications, apartment rentals, background checks. She'll be paying for what she did for the rest of her life. I don't take pleasure in that, but I don't feel sorry for her either. She made her choices. So did I. And I would make the same ones again. So here, maybe you've been through something similar. A family member who betrayed you, a spouse who stole from you, a friend who turned out to be an enemy. Maybe you're in the middle of it right now, wondering whether to fight back or walk away, whether justice is worth the cost. I can't tell you what to do. Every situation is different, every family is different. But I can tell you this, you have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to protect what's yours, and you have the right to hold people accountable, even if they're blood. What would you do if someone tried to take everything from you? Let me know in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this, stories about standing up and fighting back and finding justice when it seems impossible. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves.